It's your pleasure. Senator Platt.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, on a point of order.
Senator Platt, on a point of order.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my point of order pertains to the notice of motion given by the Leader of the Government in the Senate on April 20th, when he notified the Senate that he would be moving time allocation on Bill C-11. At the time, Senator Gold said the following, and I quote, "However, our honourable senators, I wish to advise the Senate that I have been unable to reach an agreement with the representatives of the recognized parties to allocate time to the motion as amended to respond to the message from the House of Commons concerning the Senate's amendments to Bill C-11, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act and to make related consequential amendments to other acts. Therefore, I give notice that at the next sitting of the Senate, I will move that pursuant to Rule 7-2, not more than a further 6 hours of debate be allowed for the consideration of the motion as amended to respond to the message from the House of Commons concerning the Senate amendments to Bill C-11, an act to amend the Broadcasting Act and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts." Your Honour, although it is no secret that this government wishes to ram this bill through as quickly as it can in order to avoid, I'm happy that Senator Lankin finds some humor in this, to avoid the continued embarrassment over its unpopularity. Senator Gold's notice of motion does not correctly apply the rules of the Senate and, in fact, violates them. In this regard, there are three things, Your Honour, that I would like to bring to your attention. First is that Senator Gold's notice of motion did not follow the prescribed format. As I mentioned, when Senator Gold gave notice of the motion, he stated, "I wish to advise the Senate that I have been unable to reach an agreement with the representatives of the recognized parties to allocate time to the motion." Yet the section 7.2, brackets 1 of the rule states clearly, "At any time during a sitting, a leader or deputy leader of the government may state that the representatives of the recognized parties have failed to agree." Mr. Speaker, the prescribed format for the notice of motion under section 7-2, bracket 1 is quite clear. Because the notice of motion by Senator Gold does not respect the required form, it is invalid. As everyone knows, there are precise ways to give a notice of motion, and the table, of course, can provide that script for all of us. Senator Gold deliberately chose not to follow the script, not to follow the language provided for in the rules. I would then argue that since proper notice was not given, Senator Gold cannot move the motion today. My second point, Your Honour, is that in addition to not following the form prescribed by the rules of the Senate, Senator Gold's motion did not meet the necessary prerequisites. As I already noted, section 7-2, bracket 1 of the rule states, "At any time during a sitting, the leader or deputy leader of the government may state that the representatives of the recognized parties have failed to agree to allocate time to conclude an adjourned debate." Your Honour, I do not wish to use unparliamentary language here. We have people that are quick to jump to that and call points of order on that. So allow me just to say that in making this statement, Senator Gold misled the Senate. Senator Gold never offered privately or publicly, formally or informally to meet to discuss a timeline for debate on this motion. Please allow me to provide some details and context on the discussion I had with Senator Gold on his motion in reply to the House message on C-11. On Monday, Speaker, April 17th, I had a meeting with Senator Gold, along with the leaders of the other recognized groups. He asked us what our plans were on this motion. I made it clear, I think, to all present that I could not give a definitive answer until we had seen the motion. We had just come off of a 2-week break. The government had lots of time to draft their motion, and Monday night, the motion had not been drafted, and we were told that. We were told that we would have it by midnight. What Senator Gold was asking us to do was to commit how and when we would vote on a motion that we had not seen. I finally received the motion on Tuesday morning. It was sent out the night before to my Chief of Staff. I think he received it around 10 o'clock at night. I'm not sure of the time. I got it in the morning. Later that day, Senator Gold called about that and other matters and suggested that we should meet sometime to discuss this matter. My first suggestion was that we have a meeting on Monday, yesterday, to discuss this. Senator Gold suggested that that was a little late for his preferred time and that he would like to meet earlier. I replied I could make myself available on Thursday if he wanted to meet, and he indicated that he would get back to me. He never did. During one of the bells on Thursday afternoon, late afternoon, I went across to see Senator Gold in this chamber. His deputy leader was there with him, and asked him if he thought we should have a short meeting. His response, and I don't want to say this as verbatim, but it was along the lines of, "Now is not the time." You will also recall, Mr. Speaker, that it was the deputy leader of the de facto government group in the Senate that moved a motion last Thursday to adjourn the debate on Senator MacDonald's sub-amendment. It was not the Conservatives. You will further recall that the Conservatives opposed the adjournment originally. We were happy to have question called on Senator MacDonald's sub-amendment, but it was adjourned, so we could not do that. Immediately after the adjournment, Senator Gold rose in this place and moved his notice of motion. After only 6 hours of debate on a bill where we had had 140 witnesses appear at committee and over 70 hours of testimony, without any formal or informal attempt to reach an agreement on timeline for the debate, Senator Gold rose in this chamber and stated that he could not get an agreement with me or recognized parties, of which I am the only one. Your Honor, on every controversial bill that has come through this place since approximately 2017, I have been at the negotiating table and helped negotiate with the Leader of the Government and to come to mutually acceptable arrangements. And this includes negotiating second reading on Bill C-11, along with the timelines at committee and indeed, Mr. Speaker, at third reading. This regularly happened as well with Senator Gold's predecessor, Senator Harder. But then when the message comes back from the House of Commons on the same bill, Senator Gold does not have the decency to pick up the phone and call me. Instead, he misrepresents the facts to this chamber in an astonishing, self-serving way. Senator Gold says we have failed to agree. But I would note that there has been no failure to agree because there has been no discussions on the need to allocate time on the motion in question. Consequently, there has been no opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to either agree or disagree. Although we are becoming quite accustomed to the fact that this government does not take seriously the need to consult, I do not think that diminishes the requirement of this rule for the government to do so. The rules do not permit the government to impose time allocation simply because the recognized parties do not adhere to the government's preferred schedule. The language in the rules is clear. The government can only use Section 7-2 when there is no agreement, Speaker. And in order for agreement not to be reached, there must at least be a discussion, which includes a proposed timeline. On this point, Speaker, I would like to draw your attention to a number of citations and practices and authorities. Although I am certain you have reviewed all of these, and if not, I'm sure you will review these yourself. But I believe it is important to place them on the record. In commenting on time allocation, the companion to the rules of the Senate of Canada makes the following quotation from page 660 of the House of Commons Procedure and Practice. And I quote, "While it has become the most frequently used mechanism for curtailing debate, time allocation remains a means of bringing the parties together to negotiate an acceptable distribution of the time of the House. Although referencing procedure in the House of Commons, it is quite clear by its inclusion in the companion to the rules of the Senate of Canada that the same expectation applies, Mr. Speaker, to this chamber. Time allocation is a means of bringing the parties together to negotiate. Your Honour, I regret that no such bringing together of parties happened, nor were there any negotiations. Instead, what we have is a unilateral decision by the government's representative in the Senate to curtail debate on a motion which is of significant interest to many senators of all groups, as well, Mr. Speaker, to all Canadians. This is not only inappropriate, it is against the rules. Since Senator Gold never proposed or discussed any timeline for debate on his motion on C-11, he cannot use the provisions of Rule 7-2. I suspect, Mr. Speaker, that the government leader in the Senate will object to this argument, suggesting that he did not need to make a proposal or have a discussion. He merely needed to observe that there is no agreement. That, Mr. Speaker, is incorrect. First of all, it is incorrect in principle, and again, I draw your attention to page 171 of the companion to the Rules of the Senate, which quotes Erskine May, Parliamentary Practice, 24th edition, on page 469, which notes the following. In addition, the impact of allocation of time or program orders is that to some extent mitigated either by consultations between the party representatives informally or in business committee or the programming committee in order to establish the greatest possible measure of agreement as to the most satisfactory disposal of the time available. We see here in the paragraph which precedes this quote that the spirit of the rule pertaining the spirit of the rule permitting the government to move time allocation is couched in the need to balance the claims of business with the rights of debate. This balance is critical in maintaining societal respect for the role of Parliament and obligates the government to engage in actual consultations prior to invoking the rule. I would note, Mr. Speaker, that this principle has been reaffirmed numerous times in practice in this chamber. And I would like to draw your attention to two of those. The first one is referenced in page 171 of the companion to our rules. On September 20th of 2000, Speaker Mulgat made the following ruling on a point of order regarding a notice of motion to allocate time. Note that at that time, Rule 7-2 was known as Rule 39(1). In his ruling, Senator Mulgat said the following, and I quote, "Insofar as the point raised by the Honourable Senator Kinsella is concerned, I refer specifically to Rule 39, bracket 1, which simply states that if the Deputy Leader of the government in the Senate, from his or her place in the Senate, may state that the representatives of the parties have failed to agree to allocate a specified number of days or hours that allows the Deputy Leader to give notice. Honourable Senators, the Deputy Leader has stated that an agreement has not been reached. I have no means of knowing whether an agreement will be reached. All I have before me is a motion stating that if they have reached no agreement at this point, the rule has been followed and the terms have been set out. Therefore, I rule that the point of order is not valid. I raise this citation, Mr. Speaker, because of its cursory reading of it. It seems to indicate that there is no need for the government to engage in consultations, but rather that it must only state that an agreement has not been reached. This, however, Mr. Speaker, is incorrect. Speaker Mulget was simply noting that he had no way of knowing whether an agreement had been reached, and he did so in the context of knowing full well that the parties had engaged in consultation. This was first acknowledged by the Deputy Leader of the government earlier in the day on September 20th of 2000 when he stated, and I quote, "My counterpart, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and I have been in discussion pursuant to my attempt to reach an agreement on the time to be given for third reading consideration of Bill C-37. We have been unable to reach such an agreement." Senator Kinsella, who at the time was the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, went on to affirm this fact when he said, and I quote, "The rule envisages some serious discussions to decide on the timeline for proceeding with a piece of government legislation." Your Honor, in this case, we see that there was no disagreement between the government and the opposition over the fact that an attempt to reach an agreement through discussion and negotiation was first necessary before a notice of motion could be made for time allocation. The only issue at hand during this point of order was whether or not a notice could be made before such discussions were finished. And in this context, Speaker Mulget's ruling made perfect sense, as noted by Senator Hayes, and I quote him, "To interpret Rule 39 as one that is only applicable when the relationship on a particular item of discussion is totally intractable would not be consistent with the spirit of the rule, or Rule 39, or the spirit of doing business in this chamber." He then went on to say, "Honourable Senators, I simply say that discussions have taken place and they have not produced a conclusion on this side in representing the government side. I feel that is adequate." Your Honor, I would agree that Senator Hayes was correct. If discussions had taken place and they had not produced a conclusion, then the conditions of Rule 7-2 have been met. But, as I pointed out, that is not what happened with the notice of motion I am addressing today. Senator Gold made little or no attempt to discuss a timeline with me, and consequently, he has not met the prerequisites to invoke Rule 7-2. The second Speaker's ruling that I would like to draw your attention to, as I believe it is germane to your consideration on this issue, Mr. Speaker, took place on February 19th of 2004. In this instance, Speaker Hayes was also considering a point of order on a notice of motion for time allocation. Once again, the question at hand was not whether discussions had taken place, but rather whether the discussions were adequate. At the time the rule read, "The representatives of the parties have failed to agree to allocate a specific number of days or hours for consideration." The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Senator Kinsella, was arguing that this specific criteria had not been met. But once again, the question was never whether consultations had taken place, but whether they were adequate. And as a response, Speaker Hayes said the following, Senator Kinsella's point underlines the importance of precision in terms of reference to the rules. The presiding officer finds himself in an awkward position of who to believe, which is not an area I want to enter. I will accept the notice of motion, but I will do it with this caution. Having listened to the exchange between the House leaders, I admonish them and other senators to pay close attention to the rules and observe their requirements. Speaker Hayes accepted the notice of motion because both parties acknowledged that discussions had taken place. In doing so, he underscored that when referencing the rules, precision is important. Mr. Speaker, I am asking that the same close attention be paid to the rules in this case, because as I have noted, Senator Gold has failed to do this by not consulting, and his notice of motion is not in order with our rules. I have one final point to make, Mr. Speaker. Under our rules, it is a disagreement between the recognized parties, and I repeat that, the recognized parties, that trigger the use of time allocation. Section 7-2, brackets 1 of our rules state, at any time during a sitting, the leader or deputy leader of the government may state that the representatives of the recognized parties have failed to agree. The term recognized party is defined in Appendix 1 of the rules as follows. A recognized party in the Senate is composed of at least 9 senators who are members of the same political party, which is registered under the Canada Elections Act or has been registered under the Act within the past 15 years. Mr. Speaker, the rules also contain a definition of what a recognized parliamentary group is. In fact, those two terms are used throughout our rules, making a clear distinction between a recognized party and a recognized group. And herein lies our dilemma, Mr. Speaker. There is only one recognized party in the Senate. And that, Mr. Speaker, and there are those in this chamber that are not happy with this, but the fact of the matter, that is the Conservative Party of Canada. The other 3 organized caucuses are parliamentary groups. There cannot be a disagreement between recognized parties if there is only one. That is simple. I argue with myself occasionally, and I win most of those arguments. That is not the case here. Over the last years, several changes were made to the rules of the Senate. A lot of them pertain to the new reality of having not only parties but also groups in the Senate. Yet no such change was made to Section 7. This, Mr. Speaker, was not an oversight. The Senate decided in its wisdom not to change the provision of Section 7. And I urge you, Mr. Speaker, to simply follow the rule and decide that with only one recognized party in the Senate, there cannot be disagreement. Therefore, on that point, Senator Gold's motion is out of order. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, even if there was some convoluted way of reading in parliamentary groups as the equivalent of recognized party, Senator Gold's motion would still be out of order. First, there was never a meeting of the 4 parties or groups to discuss the passage of C-11, the timelines for the passage of C-11. So there cannot be either agreement or disagreement under this scenario at this point. Finally, what the government is asking you to do, Mr. Speaker, is to not only rewrite the rules to read groups where the word parties is, but also to ask you to see the leader of the government as one of those parties when this is not how the rule reads. Senator Gold, Mr. Speaker, and all honourable senators, is a non-affiliated senator. He is neither the leader of a recognized party nor the leader of a recognized group. And he even says he is not the leader of the government.
By choice.
He is a non-affiliated senator. Non-affiliated senators have no recognized role in discussions pertaining to time allocation. Mr. Speaker, let me repeat that for all senators here. Non-affiliated senators have no recognized role in discussions pertaining to time allocation. As mentioned in Beauchesne Parliamentary Rules and Forms, 6th edition, page 162, as quoted in the companion to the Rules of the Senate of Canada, the word representatives of the parties does not include independent members. As an independent member, when Senator Gold says, "I cannot reach an agreement," it is entirely irrelevant, as he does not have a standing under Rule 7 to be part of any agreement or disagreement. Secondly, you will note that the Leader of the Government is not mentioned in Section 7 of the Rules as a necessary participant to an agreement or disagreement to trigger time allocation. This means that his role in such a Senate with respect to Section 7 would simply be to take note that an agreement has or has not been struck and to give the notice required. As I said, the current majority in the Senate has been ruling since 2016. And there has never been an attempt, Mr. Speaker, to change the language of Section 7 of the Rules. Furthermore, it was only a year ago, Mr. Speaker, that the government opened up the Parliament of Canada Act and made amendments. And yet, they did not change this part. Why? Yet now the government and its senators have the gall to ask you, Mr. Speaker, to make changes to the rules of the Senate through this notice of motion. However, Your Honour, with absolute utmost respect, your role, as defined in Section 2 of the Rules, is to rule on points of order. You have no mandate to rewrite the rules of the Senate simply because the government of the day thinks it might be convenient for them to pass the buck to you, Mr. Speaker, and ask you to do that. Frankly, I find this attempt to ask you to rewrite all of Section 7 of the Rules quite offensive. It is very unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that Senator Gold would put you, on the eve of your retirement, in a position where you are being asked to do something which is not within your power to do. They are asking you to do the job of the Rules Committee and thereafter the entire Senate. It would not surprise me, Mr. Speaker, if you were currently under a lot of pressure from the government leader here in this Senate, Senator Gold, and the Prime Minister's office to follow their wishes on this matter. I urge you, I plead with you, Mr. Speaker, do not yield to those pressures. As you know, Mr. Speaker, in 2014, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau said the following: "If the Senate serves a purpose at all, it is to act as a check on the extraordinary power of the Prime Minister and his office." If there is one truly independent senator in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, that is you. You have done a tremendous job, as was stated even earlier today, in your being independent and you making rulings that clearly were rulings that were thought through, that showed your independence. You are leaving soon. I urge you, Mr. Speaker, not to mar your excellent reputation and impartial track record by rewriting the rules of the Senate in the 11th hour of your tenure, rather than respecting and enforcing them. I know, Mr. Speaker, that you will do the right thing, and I look forward to your ruling on this matter. Thank you.